Welcome to the Everybody Matters podcast, a show dedicated to the idea that when organizations care enough to show their people that who they are and what they do matter, they unlock the only business idea with truly unlimited potential. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. Don't forget to connect with us on the web at barry-wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. Anytime we at Barry-Wehmiller get the chance to hear our friend Raj Sisodia speak, it's an opportunity to get a deeper perspective on leadership. The co-founder of Conscious Capitalism and the co-author of our CEO Bob Chapman's book, Everybody Matters, The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family, Raj always offers thoughtful insight into the role of business in our society. Raj recently spoke on the role of business as a healing organization as part of the STL Leadership at Work series in St. Louis, a new regular discussion event hosted by the BW Leadership Institute. It's actually the subject of Raj's next book, which he has just started writing. On this episode of the Everybody Matters podcast, we'd like to share this talk with you. And Raj begins by talking about his experiences writing Everybody Matters.
And as Bob said, it was really a journey for me. I thought, here's another good conscious company, and we can't write a book about every single conscious company because there's quite a few of them, right? But when I went and saw what was actually happening, I still remember my first experience. I sat down with a room full of people. You know, these are middle-aged blue-collar men working in these factories in Phillips, Wisconsin and Green Bay and so forth. And I simply asked them one question: tell me how it used to be before your company got acquired by Barry-Wehmiller and how it changed. And before they could even speak, they were all choked up, literally. And then they were telling me stories that started pouring out of them about how their life used to be and what changed for them and their children and families. And I had never quite seen that before, that much emotion, especially coming from men, right? I said, there's something special going on here. And we had long talked about, conscious capitalism as 4 pillars: higher purpose, you need a purpose, as we do in our lives. Every business should have a purpose. But we had thought about that purpose primarily in terms of what you do in the world. Whole Foods provides certain kinds of foods to people, and Container Store helps you get organized, and Southwest brings democracy to the skies, and so forth. But what Bob awakened me to the idea that people are really the highest purpose. It doesn't mean you can't have a product-centered purpose. It's like a plane with 2 engines. Ideally, you want both. But if you had to pick one, you can't be a company with a noble purpose in the world and yet your people are miserable and their families are suffering as a consequence. So that is the highest calling, people being the purpose. And then ideally you have both of those engines going. So that was one breakthrough for me, thinking beyond what we thought we knew. And then on leadership, it's not just about what happens 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, that the way we lead does impact the way people live. And therefore leadership as the stewardship of the lives entrusted to us. Again, these are extremely powerful ideas. It creates a greater onus on what does it mean to be a leader and what ability as a leader. So those are some of the things that drove me to that, and it's been a wonderful journey. 2 years, I believe, today. It also happens to be the day, by the way, that 10 years ago I met John Mackey of Whole Foods. And he had read Forms of Endearment before it was even published, and then he said, I resonate so strongly with this book, I'd love to meet you. And so I spent a day with him, and then at that evening dinner, I shared a vision for what I was calling the Institute for New Capitalism. I said, this is a whole different way of thinking about business. It changes why we do things, what we do, who we are as leaders, and how we operate. All of those have different answers when you talk about a conscious business versus a conventional business. So when I showed him that mind map, he said, that's exactly my vision. I call it conscious capitalism. So that was kind of the beginning, and a few months later we had our first retreat, and then a year later we had our first conference, and now we're in 12 countries now and all over the US. And we have another 20 chapters in the pipeline. I'm hoping at some point that we will get one here in collaboration with Barry-Wehmiller, I think, in St. Louis as well. So it's been an extraordinary journey, and very, very gratifying to see the impact, not only on the businesses, but more importantly on all the lives that those businesses represent, and the ripple effect of that into the families and communities and beyond. So this is, all emotions are contagious, negative and positive. And this is starting like an epidemic of positive contagion, I think. So again, for me now, continuing the journey beyond that, I wrote another book last year called Shakti Leadership, which is about integrating masculine and feminine into leadership. Because for very long we've had only masculine quality, men basically running every institution using only a limited set of masculine values. Domination, aggression, ambition, winning, results at all costs. Right? But there are many mature masculine values as well: strength, discernment, focus, courage, resilience. Right? And we certainly need all of those. But we have relegated nurturing, caring, compassion, empathy, relationships. Those have been relegated to something you either do in your personal life. Certainly don't bring it to work, because it's a sign of weakness somehow to show caring at work. And now we're starting to realize that the most powerful companies in the world are built on love and care. It's not about rejecting the masculine and bringing in more feminine. It's about saying, can we become whole human beings? Can we actually integrate? As Carl Jung said, every man has an inner woman, every woman has an inner man. We all have these qualities. They're human qualities. The labels get in the way, masculine, feminine. They're all human. But we have denied the more human half of our humanity for too long. And now it's time, I think, to bring those together. So again, that's kind of a continuation. Caring for people, as Bob says, as everybody is somebody's precious child. And then becoming whole human beings as leaders. Right? So that's wholeness and caring. And the logical next step for me was this idea of healing. So I believe that we live in a world of extraordinary pain and suffering. And the highest calling that we can all have as individuals and as leaders and organizations is to actually alleviate some of that suffering and bring more joy. So that's kind of the next stage. I think Barry-Wehmiller to me is a great example of a healing organization. Think about all the pain and suffering that's happening in the world. Extraordinary amount of pain and suffering in the world at all the time, right? I mean, if you stop to think about it, it'll break your heart. Physical violence and people being affected by that is down dramatically, actually, compared to historic norms. But that doesn't mean people aren't suffering. Rates of depression, rates of drug dependency, rates of all kinds of, sort of psychic suffering are extraordinarily high. Right? So the key thing is that if we are not the healing, we may be part of the hurting. And we need all kinds of healing in the world. And a lot of the suffering that is happening is, in a way, self-inflicted. People don't know how to regulate and manage their own emotions, and they can learn how to do that. There are ways to teach people. And as organizations, we can help people. Because if people are in pain and suffering, certainly from a enlightened self-interest perspective, they can't be fully engaged at work. So how do we help people with that? But also suffering that's inflicted by people on each other, by the way in which we manage. Another thing that Bob awakened me to the idea that we have too much management and not enough leadership in our organizations. And as I said, nobody wants to be managed. You can't manage your children, you can't manage your spouse. Nobody wants to be managed, right? Nobody wants to be bossed, nobody wants to be supervised. People do want to be led, they want to be inspired. So we need more leadership. But we have too much of that, we have too much of this sort of toxic managing and manipulating of people, and there's a lot of suffering that comes from that. A lot of suffering at work has to do with who you report to and how that relationship works. But a lot of this suffering is unnecessary. It comes from ignorance, it comes from fear, it comes from insecurity, it comes from people not being connected to their own higher angels, right? The better angels of their nature. Again, we need to see what we can do as individuals and as organizations to reduce suffering, alleviate suffering, and bring more joy in the world. And we can do that through business. We have a great responsibility, actually, and that is the most noble calling that we can have as businesses. And as I said, if we don't consciously choose to be part of the healing, we may be, in fact, part of the hurting. A lot of this hurting is silent. There's an awful lot of silent suffering in every organization. And as I said, we don't have torture chambers in the basements of corporations, but there is still a lot of suffering. And what can we do to reduce that and, as I said, bring more joy? And we have to do that consciously, because if we don't listen for it, and if we don't have the ability to pick up on signals of distress that exist, we are oblivious to it. Even healing professions, doctors, nurses, veterinarians, are some of the people under the greatest stress, and they have high rates of drug abuse and depression. Right? So even noble professions where you are engaged in healing of others, the people themselves are suffering. The healers whom we charge with that awesome responsibility of healing, actually are also suffering because of the way in which we work, the way in which we organize, the way. Right? So again, we have a lot to do here in order to change that, because we cannot continue anymore. Now, by the way, this is the first time I'm giving this talk. This is a new book I'm starting literally next week. Okay, so we're signing a contract for the healing organization. Is the next stage of this journey. And I think what Barry-Wehmiller is doing here, St. Louis Listens, they're doing this in many cities now. They have the nonprofit that is helping communities to heal. Aspen, I think Phillips, Green Bay, and in the Carolinas as well. We need to heal our companies, certainly, our organizational cultures. We need to heal our countries. I've never seen such division within this society, and actually many societies. There is such a divide between left and right. And business has a big role to play there. The left-right divide was really caused by unconscious capitalism. If you think about it, Marxism, socialism, and communism would never have been created were it not for the excesses, in some ways, of an unconscious approach to capitalism, where people were treated as objects, where the working conditions were horrendous. People were almost reduced to a savage existence. So militant unionism and all the other things arose as a response to the fact that we did not value people. We put out the human need to care, which is even more powerful than self-interest as a human drive. So unconscious capitalism created the left-right divide. Conscious capitalism and this way of being, like Barry-Wehmiller, that can heal the left-right divide, because it gives everything that people want on that spectrum. People on the left, they don't trust business, but they trust government, and rights, and vice versa. But when you practice business this way and you put people at the center, and the well-being of people at the center, that's really what people are looking for on the left, right? But it's rooted in voluntary action and enlightened self-interest. It's not mandated. It's not controlled by government. Capitalism offers and delivers, promises and delivers dynamism, and we need that. We can't survive without dynamism. Socialism promises but really doesn't deliver on decency. Everybody has a minimum standard and basic needs met. It doesn't work out that way. What we need is dynamism with decency. We cannot sacrifice either. We need both. And business controls 80% of all economic activity in this country. So if business doesn't do that, it's not going to happen. Government and nonprofits are not going to make up the difference. We do need to heal our planet. I think we recognize that. There's a lot there, all the life that exists on the planet, you know. And we need to heal the past, the present, and the future. You know, you really cannot, I know some of the team here were in South Africa. How did South Africa come out of those horrible decades of apartheid and not convulse into a civil war and have revenge be the primary energy driving it? Because they had a process called truth and reconciliation. And Desmond Tutu worked with Nelson Mandela, right? And they worked to heal the past and acknowledge what had happened so that they can then move on and build the future. So again, we need to do this in the world. We need to do that in businesses as well. There are things that have happened in the past out of ignorance, out of whatever it might be. But unless we heal that, the past will be with us. So do we need healing? Do you agree? Yeah? Okay. Okay. So now the question is, are we going to be a healing organization or a hurting organization? What determines that? And I believe it has almost everything to do with leadership. If the leader is stuck at a certain level of consciousness, the organization cannot move beyond that. If the leader is rooted in fear and insecurity, the organization will reflect that. Right? So we create a culture, you know, as Churchill said, we shape our buildings and then our buildings shape us. We create our culture and then our culture influences us. So we create these kinds of conditions. You can have a hurting leader that creates conditions where everybody then becomes, in a way, an agent of hurting. Or you can have a leader who's coming from a place of love and care and healing. And that everybody then becomes an extension of that. So again, the responsibility of consciously creating that kind of a culture is extraordinary. Whether our better angels or our inner demons prevail as human beings. So it all depends on leadership. And as Gandhi said, we must be the change we wish to see in the world. If you want to create a healing organization, you have to make sure that you're operating from that place of healing. That first of all, you yourself are healed or on the journey. Nobody's fully healed. If you can address those inner divisions that we might have. Most of us are fragmented beings. We are not whole inside. Can we become whole? So it's about conscious leadership. That will determine whether or not we will have a healing organizations. As Peter Drucker said, only 3 things happen naturally in organizations: friction, confusion, and underperformance. Everything else requires leadership. So taking on that awesome responsibility of leadership, and as Bob has said, leaders are the stewards of the lives entrusted to them. The way we lead impacts the way people live. So again, it all starts with leadership. All the pillars of conscious capitalism are important, of course, but the one that's ultimately going to determine the rest is conscious leadership. So I'll just share a few other stories in the last few minutes here of companies, in addition to Barry-Wehmiller, which to me is a healing organization. If you've read the book, we open with a story of Ken, who had been laid off multiple times over the years by the same employer. And some of those times he was reduced literally to picking up cans on the street to try and get some money to buy some food for the family. And then this company gets acquired by Barry-Wehmiller. And within a couple of years, his life is completely transformed. We've taken a person who was broken down, burned out, under tremendous stress as a result of their experience, and now they are whole again. Most businesses take people who are whole and healthy. Over time, they get burned out and stressed out and have all kinds of consequences. But there are businesses that do the opposite. They take people who have suffered and make them whole again. And that's the essence of a healing organization. So just a couple of other stories. I was in Atlanta. There's a company called JBN Consulting, started by a couple of ex-McKinsey consultants. One thing that they had experienced as consultants was the reality that you're typically gone Monday to Thursday of every single week at the client site. So they essentially never got to see their kids grow up, other than a little bit on the weekends. And they said, that's too high a price to pay. You know, the cost of doing business does not factor in the human costs. And they said that we'll never get that time back with our kids. So they created this company in Atlanta, and they said our practice is going to be one where all our clients will be local and nobody will ever have to travel to go to a client site. They said the children are also stakeholders of our business, not just the employees. Now again, nobody complains about that and nobody says, because that's how you do things in consulting. But you don't have to. And they changed the rule. If we have a lot of clients in Dallas, we'll open an office in Dallas. We don't need to have people flying all over the place and never see their kids. And by the way, they have 3 of the top 20 consultants in the country now, according to Industry Magazine. So this is not hurting them. In fact, this is attracting even more talented people to come and work there. But they don't now have to sacrifice and pay this extraordinary price. So again, we put a price on everything except suffering. Because we're not listening for it. We don't want to know about it. You know, you come here, do your job, be professional, deal with your issues. Another example is a company called Apple Tree Answers, which is a call center company. And one thing they realized that, you know, when you talk about employee engagement and culture and so forth, you can measure all those things at an aggregate level, but actually they found there were tremendous divisions. It was almost like a class system. You have the salaried people, the professionals in the company, 3% turnover, 90% engagement. So, wow, we're one of the best places to work. Their hourly people who made up 80% of the workforce, 118% turnover, 15% engagement. Their lives are completely different. They have no idea what they are dealing with, right? And the people making the decisions are all doing great. And the CEO gave an example. He said, what happens if our CFO is driving to work and there's a big pothole and, you know, her Mercedes goes into that and damages the not only the tire but the wheel. And so she calls AAA, they tow the car to the dealer, and she gets a ride to the office. Everybody says, "Oh, are you okay? So sorry you had to go through all that." But one of our hourly people is also driving on that same road and also has the same issue, doesn't have AAA, has to call a friend, right? It's going to be hundreds of dollars of cost which she doesn't have. Gets to the office 3 hours late, gets reprimanded by the supervisor, gets her pay docked, gets a negative check against her record. And then is told, now go and be good to our customers. Go and answer the phones and then treat our customers well. So it's a non-event for the CEO. It's a traumatic event. But again, suffering, we don't recognize. So they started a program in an attempt to change their culture. It was kind of like the Make-A-Wish Foundation. They call it Dream On. And they said, tell us what you need. Tell us the big things that are going on in your life where we can help as a company. And for 2 or 3 weeks, nobody responded because they were embarrassed. And they didn't really trust that anything would happen given the history. Finally, one woman reached out and said, I'm sorry, I'm at the end of the rope. I don't know what to do. My husband stopped paying child support. We lost our apartment. We got evicted. And my 2 kids and I have been living in the car for a week. And I can't do it anymore. And this comes to the CEO. And the first thing he feels is a deep sense of shame. He said, I've got a full-time employee who's homeless. What am I doing? Right? How is this even possible or acceptable? So of course they got her into a hotel that night, and within a week they had an apartment for her and furnished it and helped her with all of those things. And after that they said, you don't have to tell other people, you can keep this confidential. She said, are you kidding? I want to tell everybody I know what you guys did. And then the floodgates opened, and these extraordinary things started pouring out. All the things people are dealing with. Do you know that 50% of Americans could not come up with $2,000 within 3 weeks if they had an emergency? Their car broke down or they had a heating system. They are that close to the edge. 60% of Americans are technically insolvent and rising in debt, the negative net worth and rising in debt. People are desperate. People are really in tough situations. But again, do we listen? Do we know? Do we care? Come and do your job, right? So, this book is, so far we have a lot of stories like that of companies and very, very moving. I'll just end with one more. By the way, there's a construction company in Bellingham, Washington, started by these 2 guys who grew up in construction. A very brutal culture. People get yelled at and screamed at, and it's a very macho, aggressive kind of an industry. And they said, we want to do something very different when we start this company. And they created what they call a balanced transaction. They said, we're going to ask our employees for 2 things that we need, and we'll tell them, what are the 2 things that you need from us? So employees said, we would like to be paid fairly and well so we can look after our families, so we'll make sure we do that. And we would like to have time to be with our kids. We'll make sure we do that. What do you need from us? Well, we need you to be safe. Okay, that's important in construction. The second requirement, we need you to be kind. Only other requirement they placed on employees is kindness. Safety and kindness, that's all they asked from their employees. Nothing about efficiency or showing up on time or working hard, whatever. And the company, of course, is doing extremely well. Everybody wants to go work there. They are highly successful in the world. Again, building a platform on healing and caring for people. Last story, Greyston Bakery is a bakery in Yonkers, New York that supplies Ben & Jerry's, if you buy their chocolate brownie ice cream, and also Whole Foods. So they've been baking brownies for years, but the key thing that differentiates them is what they call the open hiring model. If you need a job, they have a list, you put your name on that list. And they just go down the list and hire the next person. There's no background checks and there's no interviews. And then they train them and give them a job. The reason they did this was that there are 70 million people in America who have a criminal record of some kind. And most jobs are close to them. They said, we want to give people a first opportunity, not even a second chance, a first chance. So many of these people never got a chance. They had no hope and no opportunity growing up in the circumstances that they were in, ended up doing things that got them in jail, and then they come back and they can't find a job because now they have a record and they go back. It just keeps going. 70 million, the same number of Americans who have a college degree have a criminal record. And most of them have served their time, and these are nonviolent offenses, and yet they can't get any opportunities. There's a young man named Dion who came and spoke at our conference along with the CEO, and he had been in jail 3 times, most recently for 3 years, and he said, every time I come out, I look for months to get a job, and nobody will hire me, and I end up back on the street doing whatever I did to get in trouble in the first place. This time I found Greyston Bakery. I got a job there 3 years ago. Now he has a little daughter. And he said, if it weren't for this company, I would either be dead or I'd be back in jail. So this is what business can do. This is the opportunity we have, not only to create wealth and shareholder value, but actually to rescue people and heal them and do these extraordinary things for human beings and for society. I'll end with a quote from the Pope. We had a conference at the Vatican a year and a half ago. This Pope really gets it. He used to be a socialist, but now he gets the power of business to do good in the world. Enterprises exist to serve. All human activities, including business, can be an exercise in mercy, which is partaking in God's love for mankind. And I think that's what business can be, and must be, really. There's too much hurting. We have to start healing. Thank you very much.
If you'd like to learn more about Raj, check out his website, rajsisodia.com. You can find him on Twitter, @RajSisodiaCC. And if you'd like to find out more about the book Raj wrote with Barry-Wehmiller CEO Bob Chapman, Everybody Matters, The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family, go to everybodymattersbook.com. For updates on the book, this podcast, and for a lot of great content and insight, don't forget to connect with us on the web at barrywehmiller.com, on Twitter @BarryWehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening, and don't forget, Everybody Matters is the only business idea with truly unlimited potential.